Some relationships don't end because someone stopped loving. They end because two people who genuinely loved each other were also genuinely wrong for each other. And those are hardest one. There isn't nobody to blame, and the brain needs someone to blame. Let me describe a specific situation. Two people who looked at each other and early on and made a promise. Not always out loud, sometimes just in a way. They looked at each other. We are going to fight for this, whatever it comes. We are going to fight for each other, and they mean it. Both of them at the same time, with the same sincerity, and then life happened. And what they discovered, slowly, painfully, and too late to avoid the damage, was that they were too different. Not different in the interesting way, different in the way where one person natural way of being in the world is experienced by the other as a direct attack on theirs, where the things that made each other of them who they are were incompatible at the level of daily life, and the fighting for each other that they had promised gradually become fighting with each other, and then just fighting, and then something worse than fighting. The slowly multiple erosion of two people who stayed too long in something that was destroying them both. Not because they were weak, because they had made a promise, and promise feel like identity, and breaking them feels like becoming someone you don't want to be. If you have lived this episode is for you. Not to explain what went wrong, you probably already know. To talk about what comes after knowing, and how to carry it without it carrying you. Let me start with the pain, because the pain needs to be named before anything else can be said. The specific pain of this situation, two people who meant well, who hurt each other anyway, is different from other relationship pain. It isn't the clean pain of betrayal, where at least you know who did what. It is the complicated pain of collision, where you were both trying to do the right thing, and somehow that wasn't enough, where love was real and damage was also real. At the same time, in the same relationship, and the brain doesn't know what to do with that. Because the brain wants a story with a clear villain, and when the villain is the incompatibility rather than a person, when both people were trying and still couldn't make it work, the brain wants villains anyway. Sometimes it makes the other person the villain, sometimes it makes you the villain, sometimes both. Alternating, depending on the day, and neither version is accurate and neither version helps. The accurate version is harder to hold. Two people who were real, who tried, who weren't built for each other in the way the daily life requires, and who paid a real price for finding that out. That version doesn't give you someone to be angry at. It gives you something to grieve, and grief is harder than anger, because grief doesn't have an object. It just has a weight. Now let me talk about phases, because pain like this doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in stages, and knowing the stages doesn't make them shorter, but it makes them less terrifying, because when you are inside a phase and you don't know its phase, it feels permanent, and permanent is the most frightening word in the language of pain. The first phase is shock, even when the ending wasn't sudden. Even both knew for a long time that something was wrong. The moment it is actually over produces a specific kind of disorientation. The daily structure is gone. The future you were built toward is gone. The person who was supposed to be there is no longer there in the way they were. And the brain, which organized itself around all of that, doesn't know where to put itself. This phase feels like numbness or unreality, or both simultaneously. It isn't a sign that you didn't care enough. It is a sign that you carried. The second phase is anger, and as we covered earlier, the brain needs a villain. This is the phase where it finds one, sometimes the other person, sometimes yourself, sometimes the situation, sometimes all three in the same afternoon. The anger isn't irrational. It is the brain trying to make sense of pain that doesn't have a clean explanation. Let it move through. Don't build a home in it. The third phase is the hardest one and the most misunderstood. It is the grief. Not the person exactly, not even for the relationship exactly, for the future that was supposed to exist. The version of your life that included them. That future doesn't exist now. And grieving something that never happened is stronger and real. In equal measure, the phase has no clear timeline. It arrives unpredictably in the middle of ordinary days, in songs, in seasons, in specific light at specific time of the year. That isn't a malfunction. This is how grief works. It doesn't move in a line. It moves in waves. And waves get smaller over time, not because feeling stops being real, because you get better at swimming. The fourth phase is integration. This isn't the ending of the pain, it is beginning of carry it differently. The experience stops being something that happened to you and starts being something that is now part of you, not wound that defines you, part of the architecture that built you into whatever you are becoming. Not everyone reaches this phase quickly. Some people spend years in the anger because the anger is more comfortable than the grief underneath it. And some people skip the grief by replacing the relationship immediately and discovering the phases arriving years later in a different context with a different person who has nothing to do with the original pain. There is no shortcut, but there is a direction, and the direction is always true. Now the part about acceptance, and I want to be specific about what acceptance means, because it misunderstood almost every time it is discussed. Acceptance isn't saying it was fine, it wasn't fine. Acceptance isn't saying you weren't hurt, you were hurt deeply, genuinely, in ways that changed things. Acceptance isn't forgiving before you are ready. You don't own forgiveness on any timeline. Acceptance is something simpler and harder than all of that. Acceptance is stopping the argument with the past. The argument that sounds like it shouldn't have happened. You should have seen it earlier if they had just been different. I had just been different. If the circumstances had been different, that argument is real and it produces nothing. It doesn't change what happened. It doesn't extract the lesson faster. It doesn't heal the wound earlier. It adds suffering to the pain. As we covered in episode 20, pain is unavoidable. Suffering is what we added to it. The pain of that relationship, the real cost of two people who weren't built for each other, discovering that too late, the pain is real and deserves to be felt. The argument with it is optional, and stopping the argument is where something new becomes possible. Now the part about what the experience actually contains. Because every significant experience, every one that hurt the most, contains something that can't be obtained any other way. The relationship that collided taught you something about yourself that comfortable relationship wouldn't have. It showed you where your edges are, the places where you are inflexible because they are essential to you, the places where you bend more than you should, the specific way that you need to be treated, to remain the version of yourself that you respect. Those things aren't comfortable to know, but they are available to know. The person who came out of something that hurt that much and actually examines what it showed them, not to assign blame, to understand themselves more accurately. That person doesn't make the same kind of mistake again, not the same one. They might make new ones, everyone does, but the specific collision, the specific incompatibility that produces this pain, they recognize it earlier next time, because it has shape now, and shapes can be seen. The last thing, happiness after something like this doesn't come from getting over it. That framing, get over it, move on, put it behind you, this is significant. This isn't how human beings work. The significant experience don't go behind us. They go inside us. They become part of the architecture. Happiness after real pain comes from integrating it, making it part of the story rather than breaking it. The promise that was made, we will fight for each other, wasn't wrong. The person who made it wasn't wrong. The situation was impossible. And knowing that, really knowing it, not as excuse, as an accurate description of what happeneth. It's the beginning of carrying it differently, not without weight, with less of weight that was added by the argument with it. And that reduction is enough to breathe. And breathing is enough to start, and starting is enough for now. If you know someone who is in the middle of this right now, not at the end, in the middle, where it's still rough and still moving, and still feels like it might not pass, send them this, not as advice, not as solution, as the acknowledgement that what they are carrying is real, and that carrying it doesn't mean it will always weigh this much.